In the vast expanse of the Galactic Federation Academy, where beings from 1,000 worlds trained together under artificial gravity and filtered atmosphere, there existed an unspoken rule: never pick a fight with a human. Not because they were the strongest, fastest, or smartest species in the galaxy. Far from it. But because when cornered, when threatened, when pushed beyond their breaking point, humans transformed into something that defied every evolutionary law the galaxy understood. Marcus Chun was about to prove this rule in the most spectacular way possible. The 7 Crothan cadets thought they were teaching a lesson to an uppity Deathworlder who didn't know his place. What they didn't realize was that they were about to become a cautionary tale whispered in every dormitory, mess hall, and training ground across 3 sectors. A story that would make alien mothers warn their children about the sleeping giants from Sol 3 and why you should never, ever wake them up. This is that story. Marcus Chun had always been smaller than his human peers. At 5 feet 6 inches and weighing barely 140 pounds, he looked more like a scholar than a warrior. His dark hair was perpetually messy, his brown eyes held a quiet intelligence, and his gentle demeanor had earned him exactly 0 friends among the more aggressive species of the Galactic Federation Academy. This was precisely why the Crothan Pack had chosen him as their target. The Academy sprawled across 3 continents of the neutral world Nexus Prime, its gleaming spires reaching toward a sky painted with the aurora of 2 moons. Here, the best and brightest from across the galaxy came to train as officers in the Federation fleet. The human contingent was small, only 200 out of nearly 50,000 cadets, but their reputation preceded them like a dark shadow. Humans were Deathworlders, survivors from a planet so hostile that it had bred them into something the rest of the galaxy viewed with a mixture of fascination and terror. Earth, with its crushing gravity, poisonous atmosphere composition, extreme weather patterns, and predatory ecosystem, had forged its children in fires that would kill most galactic species within hours. Yet somehow, these fragile-looking bipeds had not only survived, but thrived, eventually developing technology that allowed them to join the galactic community. Marcus walked through the Academy's main corridor, his datapad clutched in one hand while his other hand absently rubbed his shoulder. The artificial gravity here was set to galactic standard, which was roughly 60% of Earth normal. For most humans, this felt like walking on the moon. For Marcus, who had grown up in Earth's full gravity well, it felt like flying. Every step had a bounce to it. Every movement required conscious effort to not overcompensate. The corridor buzzed with activity as cadets from dozens of species hurried to their next classes. Tall, graceful Etherians glided past on appendages that seemed too delicate to support their translucent bodies. Massive Thoraxians clomped by, their chitinous shells gleaming under the Academy's artificial sunlight. Crystalline resonance chimed softly as they communicated in harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. And then there were the Crothan. 7 of them blocked the corridor ahead, their reptilian forms arranged in a loose semicircle that forced other cadets to find alternate routes. Each stood nearly 7 feet tall, their green-scaled hides marked with the ritual scars that indicated their status in their warrior culture. Their eyes, yellow with vertical pupils, tracked Marcus's approach with the focused attention of predators. Marcus slowed, but didn't stop. He'd learned early in his academy career that showing fear to predator species was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. Instead, he kept his pace steady, his expression neutral, and his eyes focused on the gap between 2 of the smaller Crothan that would allow him to pass without direct confrontation. Human, the largest Crothan called out, his voice a guttural rasp that carried the accent of the Crothan core worlds. "You walk in our territory." Marcus stopped, knowing he had no choice. The Crothan weren't just physically imposing. They were also the sons of important families, military leaders, and politicians who had influence that extended far beyond the Academy. Getting into a direct confrontation with them would mean the end of his career before it began. "Apologies," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "I wasn't aware this corridor was claimed." The lead Crothin, whose scar patterns marked him as Corvex clan, stepped closer. His name was Thaktor, and he was the son of Admiral Thakmor, one of the Federation's most decorated Crothin officers. This gave him a level of immunity that made him dangerous. Everything is claimed, little human. Your kind forgets that you are newcomers here. The galaxy has rules, hierarchies that existed long before your species learned to make fire. You would do well to remember your place. The other cadets in the corridor had stopped to watch. This wasn't unusual. Confrontations between species were common at the Academy, though they rarely escalated to violence. The Academy's strict honor code usually prevented things from going too far, but the code had loopholes that species like the Crothin had learned to exploit. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he was cornered. It was a feeling he'd learned to recognize and control during his childhood on Earth, where backing down from a fight often meant becoming a permanent victim. But here, the stakes were different. Here, fighting back could mean court-martial, expulsion, or worse. Understand, Marcus said carefully. Perhaps you could direct me to an acceptable path to the engineering sector? Thaktor's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Perhaps. But first, you need to understand the cost of using our corridors without permission. Consider it a toll. What kind of toll? Kneel, one of the other Crothans said. Show proper respect to your superiors. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt every eye in the corridor on him, measuring his response. He could feel the weight of expectation, the assumption that he would comply because he was small, because he was alone, because he was human and therefore weak in their eyes. The smart thing to do was kneel. Take the humiliation, file a complaint with the Academy authorities, and let the system handle it. That was what a civilized, rational person would do. That was what the Academy expected of its cadets. But Marcus Chun hadn't survived growing up in the slums of New Angeles by being civilized and rational. He'd survived by knowing when to pick his battles and when to make a stand. And something deep inside him, something that had been forged in Earth's unforgiving crucible, recognized this moment for what it was. No, he said simply. The single word seemed to echo in the suddenly silent corridor. Even the background hum of the Academy's life support systems seemed to quiet, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Thaktor's expression shifted from amusement to something darker. Excuse me. I said no. I won't kneel to you or anyone else. If you want respect, earn it. The lead Crothin's scales flushed a deeper shade of green, a sign of rising aggression in his species. Around him, the other six began to shift position, unconsciously forming a hunting pack formation that would allow them to attack from multiple angles. You dare insult the honor of Clan Corvex. Thaktor's voice dropped to a growl. You forget yourself, human. Your species may have clawed its way out of the mud of your death world, but that doesn't make you our equals. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down, his perception sharpening as his body began preparing for what was coming. It was an evolutionary response bred into humans over millions of years of being prey animals who had to fight or die. Most galactic species had evolved past this state, having developed societies that eliminated such base survival instincts. But humans carried it with them like a loaded weapon, hidden beneath their civilized exterior. Maybe not, Marcus said, his voice taking on a quality that made several nearby cadets step back unconsciously. But I guess we'll find out. The Academy's corridors were designed to handle crowds, with high ceilings and wide spaces that could accommodate the varied physiologies of the galaxy species. The section where they stood was near the intersection of three major thoroughfares, with alcoves and service corridors that branched off like capillaries. The flooring was a composite material that provided traction for everything from thoracian claws to Etherian neural tendrils. Thaktor raised one clawed hand, and Marcus noticed the way the other Crothin shifted position. This wasn't a spontaneous confrontation. They'd planned this, probably watched his routine for days to find the perfect moment and location. The realization sent a chill down his spine, not from fear, but from the recognition of what was about to happen. In Crothan culture, a formal challenge required witnesses and ritual, but an informal beating, especially a member of a species they considered inferior, required only opportunity. And they'd created the perfect opportunity. Last chance, human. Kneel and apologize, and we'll only take your dignity. Refuse, and we'll take much more. Marcus looked around the corridor, seeing the faces of the other cadets. Some showed interest, others fear. A few displayed the calculating expressions of those wondering whether to intervene or simply record the incident for later viewing. None of them would help him. In their eyes, this was just another example of the natural order asserting itself. But Marcus had learned something during his years on Earth that none of them understood. Sometimes, the only way to win was to make the cost of victory so high that your opponent regretted starting the fight in the first place. Then come and take it, he said. The words were barely out of his mouth when the first Crothan moved. Not Thaktor, but one of the smaller ones, apparently eager to prove himself. He lunged forward with the confident aggression of a predator attacking prey, his clawed hands reaching for Marcus's shoulders. What happened next would be debated in academy cafeterias for years to come, analyzed and reanalyzed by tactical instructors and species psychologists alike. Because in that moment, Marcus Chun stopped being a cadet and became something else entirely. He moved. The Crothan's lunge, which should have connected easily with the smaller human, met empty air. Marcus had dropped and rolled, using the low gravity to his advantage as he spun beneath the alien's outstretched arms. As he came up behind his attacker, he drove his elbow upward into the soft spot where the Crothan's ribs connected to his spine. The blow shouldn't have done much damage. Marcus was smaller, lighter, theoretically weaker than his opponent. But the force behind it carried something the Crothan hadn't expected. The focused aggression of a species that had fought its way to the top of a planetary food chain, where everything else wanted to kill it. The Crothan made a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe and staggered forward, his nervous system momentarily confused by the precise strike. Before he could recover, Marcus was moving again, his training taking over as muscle memory and instinct combined into something terrifyingly effective. The Academy trained its cadets in combat, but the focus was on civilized conflict resolution, formal dueling protocols that emphasized honor and restraint. What Marcus was doing wasn't dueling. It wasn't even fighting in any sense that the watching aliens would recognize. It was something much older and more primal, survival at any cost. The second Crothan came in from the left, thinking to catch the human while he was focused on the first attacker. But Marcus seemed to have eyes in the back of his head, spinning away from the grab and bringing his knee up in a move that would have shattered a human's ribcage. The Crothan's tougher physiology saved him from serious injury, but the impact still lifted him off his feet and sent him crashing into a decorative planter. Thaktor finally moved, his larger size and greater experience allowing him to close the distance before Marcus could fully recover. His clawed hand wrapped around the human's throat, lifting him off the ground with casual ease. "Enough games," the Crothan leader snarled. "Time to learn some respect." For a moment, it seemed like the fight was over. Marcus dangled in Thaktor's grip, his feet kicking uselessly in the air while his hands clawed at the alien's powerful arm. The watching crowd relaxed slightly, expecting to see the inevitable conclusion of a mismatched fight. But then Marcus's struggling stopped, and his expression changed. The panic left his eyes, replaced by something that made several of the observing cadets step back unconsciously. In that moment, every predatory instinct the galaxy species had evolved told them the same thing. They were looking at something dangerous. Marcus's hands moved with surgical precision, finding nerve clusters in Thaktor's arm that the Crothan didn't even know existed. His thumbs pressed into specific points while his fingers dug into others, using pressure point techniques that human martial artists had perfected over centuries of warfare. Thaktor's grip spasmed and released, his arm going temporarily numb as confused nerve signals made his muscles betray him. Marcus dropped to the ground in a controlled crouch. Then, immediately launched himself upward, the crown of his head connecting with the underside of Thaktor's jaw in a move that would have killed a human. The Crothan staggered backward, golden blood streaming from his mouth where he'd bitten through his own tongue. His eyes were wide with something that might have been disbelief or the beginning of fear. "Impossible," he said, the word distorted by his injured mouth. "You're just a human." Marcus wiped blood from a cut on his forehead where Thaktor's claws had caught him. When he looked up, the expression on his face was something that transcended species barriers. Every watching alien recognized it instinctively. The look of a predator that had been challenged in its territory. "That's the problem with the rest of you," Marcus said, his voice carrying a quality that made the corridor seem smaller somehow. "You think just human means something." The remaining 5 Crothan exchanged glances, their confidence shaken, but not broken. They were still larger, still stronger, still outnumbered him 5-1. In any rational analysis, they should have been able to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. But rationality had left the building the moment Marcus had decided to fight back. What remained was something far older and more dangerous, a human being who had been pushed too far and had nothing left to lose. The Academy's surveillance systems recorded everything, as they were designed to do. But what they captured in those next few seconds would require teams of analysts to fully understand. Because what happened next wasn't just a fight between cadets. It was a demonstration of why humanity had been able to claw its way from the bottom of the food chain to the stars, and why the rest of the galaxy would never quite understand what they'd let into their community. Marcus Chon was about to remind them all what it meant to be human. The remaining 5 Crothan moved with the coordinated precision of a pack that had hunted together before. They spread out in a classic formation, designed to prevent their prey from escaping while ensuring that each attacker had a clear avenue of attack. It was textbook predator behavior, refined over millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of military training. Against most opponents, it would have been overwhelming. Against Marcus Chun, it was about to become a lesson in why humans had never developed pack hunting strategies. They hadn't needed to. Each human was a pack unto themselves. The first to move was Vashtar, the youngest of the group, and eager to prove himself after watching 2 of his packmates fall to the small human. He came in low, attempting to tackle Marcus around the waist in a move that should have been unstoppable. His timing was perfect, his technique flawless, his execution exactly what the Academy combat instructors would have recommended. Marcus wasn't there when he arrived. The human had read the attack before Vashtar had fully committed to it, seeing in the subtle shift of weight and the angle of approach exactly what was coming. Instead of trying to avoid the tackle, he'd stepped into it, his body moving in a way that seemed to defy physics as he used the Crothan's momentum against him. Vashtar found himself flying through the air. His carefully planned attack turned into an uncontrolled tumble that ended when he crashed into the corridor wall with enough force to crack the decorative stone facing. He slumped to the ground, conscious but stunned, his inner ears struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Before the watching crowd could fully process what they'd seen, Marcus was already engaging the next attacker. Corvash, a mid-ranked warrior whose scars told the story of dozens of successful hunts, approached more cautiously. He'd seen what happened to his packmates and adjusted his strategy accordingly. But Corvash had made the same mistake that every non-human in the galaxy made when facing a human in combat. He was trying to fight a civilized battle against an opponent who had abandoned civilization the moment the first blow was struck. Marcus didn't wait for Corvash to attack. Instead, he closed the distance himself, moving with a fluid grace that made it seem like he was dancing rather than fighting. But there was nothing artistic about what he did when he reached the Crothan. His first strike was a palm heel to Corvash's solar plexus, delivered with enough force to drive the air from the alien's lungs. As Corvash doubled over, gasping for breath, Marcus's knee came up to meet his descending face. The impact produced a wet cracking sound that made several observers wince. Corvash staggered backward, golden blood streaming from his shattered nose, but Marcus wasn't finished. He followed up with a series of strikes that came too fast for the eye to follow, each one targeting a specific weakness in Crothan anatomy that he'd learned from studying their species' physiological data. A hammer fist to the nerve cluster at the base of the skull. An elbow strike to the floating ribs that protected their secondary heart. A knee to the inside of the thigh that hit the major artery feeding their leg muscles. Each blow was precise, economical, devastating in its effectiveness. Corvash collapsed, his nervous system overwhelmed by pain signals it had never been designed to process. He was still conscious, but his body refused to obey his commands, leaving him helpless on the corridor floor. The watching crowd had grown larger as news of the fight spread through the Academy's communication networks. Cadets from dozens of species pressed closer, their conversations a babble of languages and communication methods as they tried to understand what they were witnessing. Most of them had heard stories about human combat effectiveness, of course. The Deathworlder reputation preceded them throughout the galaxy. But there was a difference between knowing something intellectually and seeing it demonstrated with brutal clarity. Impossible, breathed a Thoraxian cadet, her crystalline voice carrying harmonic overtones of disbelief. He's so small. Size means nothing to a Deathworlder, replied an Etherian instructor who had pushed through the crowd to observe. Their entire species evolved on a world where survival required adaptability, not strength. They learned to use every advantage available to them. Factor had recovered from his earlier stunning, though his jaw still ached and golden blood still dripped from his mouth. He watched his packmates fall with growing rage and something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine fear. "Enough!" he roared, his voice carrying the authority of generations of military leadership. "Take him down, all of you together." The remaining 3 Crothan abandoned any pretense of honorable single combat and rushed Marcus simultaneously. It was a smart tactical decision, the kind of practical thinking that had made their species successful warriors throughout the galaxy. 3 opponents attacking from different angles should have overwhelmed even the most skilled fighter. But Marcus had spent his childhood in the gang-infested streets of New Angeles, where survival often meant facing multiple opponents with nothing but his wits and his willingness to do whatever it took to stay alive. He learned that when you couldn't avoid a fight, the key was to make sure it ended quickly and decisively. As the 3 Crothan closed in, Marcus did something that violated every principle of combat taught at the Academy. Instead of trying to create distance or a fine cover, he moved directly into the center of their formation. The Academy's combat instructors taught that positioning was everything in a fight. You wanted to control distance, maintain your base, keep your opponents in front of you where you could see them. What Marcus did was tactically insane by any conventional standard, and it was absolutely devastating in its effectiveness. By moving into the center of their formation, he forced the Crothan to adjust their attacks to avoid hitting each other. Suddenly, their numerical advantage became a liability as they had to worry about friendly fire as much as they did about their target. Marcus's first target was Tar, the heaviest of the 3, whose slow reaction time made him the easiest to exploit. As the Crothan's massive fist came down toward his head, Marcus stepped aside and grabbed the extended arm, using his opponent's own momentum to swing him around into the path of another attacker. The collision sent both Crothans stumbling. Their carefully coordinated attack turned into chaos. Before they could recover, Marcus had already moved on to the 3rd opponent, a lean warrior named Thekmor whose speed had made him dangerous. But speed was a relative concept, and Thekmor had never faced an opponent who moved like Marcus did. The human seemed to anticipate his attacks before he made them, flowing around his strikes like water around stone. Every missed attack left Thekmor more exposed, more vulnerable to the counterstrikes that came with mechanical precision. Marcus's response was a brutal combination that started with a knee to Thekmor's stomach, followed by an elbow to the back of his neck as he doubled over, and finished with a spinning heel kick to his temple that sent him crashing into a nearby information terminal. The terminal screen cracked under the impact, sparks flying as delicate electronics were crushed by alien bone and muscle. Thekmor slumped to the ground, his eyes rolling back as his consciousness fled. 4 down, 3 to go. The watching crowd had fallen silent, the casual chatter replaced by the tense quiet of observers who were witnessing something they didn't quite understand. Some of the younger cadets looked sick, their alien physiologies reacting poorly to the violence they were seeing. Others watched with the fascinated attention of students presented with a new and terrible lesson. Esikatar and his collision partner had untangled themselves and were approaching more cautiously now, their earlier confidence replaced by something approaching wariness. They'd seen what happened to their packmates, and even through their rage, they could recognize that they were facing something outside their experience. "He's just one human," Esikatar muttered, though his voice carried less conviction than his words suggested. "We can take him." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, noting with detached interest that he was barely breathing hard. The Academy's reduced gravity made everything feel effortless, while the carefully controlled atmosphere was like breathing pure oxygen compared to Earth's pollution-choked cities. But it wasn't the physical advantages that made the difference. It was something deeper, something that the galaxy's civilized species had forgotten in their rise to technological sophistication. It was the simple, brutal arithmetic of survival. When everything wants to kill you, you learn to kill everything first. "Your turn," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge that made both remaining Crothans step back unconsciously. Thaktor snarled and charged, abandoning any pretense of strategy in favor of pure aggression. His size and strength advantage should have been overwhelming, his longer reach and heavier build making him the clear favorite in any direct confrontation. But direct confrontation was exactly what Marcus had been avoiding throughout the entire fight. As Thaktor closed the distance, the human dropped low and swept the Crothan's legs, using the alien's forward momentum to send him crashing to the ground. Before Thaktor could recover, Marcus was on him, one hand grabbing the back of his head while the other went for his throat. It was a position that should have been impossible to maintain against a stronger opponent, but Marcus used leverage and pressure points to make it work. "Yield," Marcus said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only Thaktor could hear him. The Crothan leader struggled, his powerful muscles straining against the hold, but every movement only made it tighter. Marcus had found the perfect balance point where Thaktor's strength worked against him, turning his struggles into a trap that grew more inescapable with every second. "Never," Thaktor gasped, golden blood from his earlier injuries making speech difficult. "Then, we do this the hard way," Marcus replied. What happened next was a masterclass in human anatomy and physiology applied to xenobiology. Marcus had spent months studying the biological data available on every species at the Academy, not out of academic interest, but from the practical knowledge that information was often the difference between victory and defeat. Crothan physiology was built around redundancy and resilience. They had backup organs for most vital functions, distributed nervous systems that made them resistant to stunning attacks, and muscle density that gave them tremendous physical strength. But every biological system had weaknesses, and Marcus had memorized them all. His thumb found the pressure point where the Crothan's primary and secondary nervous systems intersected, just behind the base of the skull. Applied pressure there wouldn't cause permanent damage, but it would create a cascade of neural feedback that would overwhelm the alien's consciousness. Thaktor's struggles grew weaker, his vision blurring as his nervous system received conflicting signals. The proud leader of the hunting pack found himself helpless in the grip of a human who weighed half what he did. "Yield," Marcus said again. This time, Thaktor's pride warred with his survival instinct. He could feel consciousness slipping away, could sense that he was seconds away from complete helplessness. In Crothan culture, there was no shame in yielding to a superior opponent, but everything about this situation violated his understanding of how the universe worked. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were newcomers, barely civilized primitives who had been granted membership in the Federation more out of curiosity than respect. They weren't supposed to be able to do this to a superior species like the Crothan. But the evidence was wrapped around his throat and pressing against his spine. Whatever humans were supposed to be, this one was proving something else entirely. I yield, he whispered, the words torn from him by necessity rather than choice. Marcus released the hold immediately, stepping back as Thaktor collapsed to his hands and knees, gasping for air. The human's eyes immediately went to Esikatar, the last Crothan still standing. The big warrior looked around at his fallen packmates, then back at the small human who had defeated them all. His scales had flushed pale green, a sign of uncertainty in his species. Everything about the situation violated his understanding of how combat worked. "Well?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a deadly quiet that somehow filled the entire corridor. Esikatar looked at Thaktor, still gasping on the ground. He looked at his other packmates, unconscious or groaning in pain. He looked at the crowd of watching aliens, their expressions ranging from shock to fascination to outright fear. Then he looked back at Marcus Chun, the small human who had just redefined what it meant to be dangerous. "I yield," Sitar said, his voice carrying across the silent corridor. The fight was over, but its consequences were just beginning. The Academy's medical bay had never seen anything quite like it. 7 Crothan cadets lay in various states of injury, their golden blood contrasting sharply with the sterile white sheets of their biobeds. The medical staff, a mixture of species renowned for their healing abilities, moved between the patients with expressions of professional concern mixed with barely concealed amazement. Dr. Shishikar, the Academy's chief medical officer, was a Nerian whose 4 arms and advanced understanding of xenobiology made her one of the most skilled healers in the Federation. She had treated injuries from training accidents, sporting events, and even the occasional duel between honor-bound species. But this was different. "How many attackers did you say the human faced?" she asked Commander Vorthike, the Academy's head of security, as she ran a bioscanner over Thaktor's bruised throat. 7. The massive Gorlin replied, his rocky hide scarred from decades of military service. All of them Crothan warriors, all from respected military families. The surveillance footage is illuminating. Dr. Shishikar's primary eyes focused on the readouts, while her secondary eyes continued monitoring the other patients. Crothan physiology was remarkably resilient, but the injury she was seeing suggested a level of anatomical knowledge that bordered on surgical precision. "These aren't random injuries," she said, highlighting several points on her scanner display. "Look at this pattern. Every strike targeted specific nerve clusters, pressure points, or structural weaknesses unique to Crothan anatomy. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Commander Vorthake rumbled his agreement. "The human, Marcus Chun, we're looking into his background now, but preliminary reports suggest he's just a standard Academy cadet. Engineering track, average grades, no history of violent behavior. Standard cadets don't do this," the doctor replied, gesturing toward the injured Crothan. "This level of precision requires extensive study of alien biology and combat training that goes far beyond Academy curriculum. How many bones are broken? Surprisingly few. 3 cracked ribs, 1 fractured nasal cavity, several deep bruises, and what appears to be temporary neural disruption in 2 of them. Considering the scope of the engagement, it's almost like the human was holding back." Dr. Shishikar paused in her examination, her 4 hands stilling as the implications sank in. "Holding back? You think he could have done worse?" "I think," Commander Vorthike said slowly, "that if he had wanted to kill them, we would be dealing with corpses instead of injured cadets." Across the Academy, the footage of the fight was spreading through the cadet network with viral intensity. Every species had their own interpretation of what they'd witnessed, but the common thread was disbelief. Humans had a reputation for being dangerous, but this was something else entirely. In the Etherian dormitories, translucent beings gathered around holographic displays, their harmonic voices creating a complex symphony of analysis and debate. "The movement patterns are fascinating," chimed Melodiesinger, a senior cadet whose specialty was tactical analysis. "See how he positions himself to use their attacks against them? It's like he's conducting a dance where only he knows the steps. But the violence is so primitive responded another Etherian. Such raw aggression seems beneath a species that has developed faster than light travel. Perhaps that's the point, Melodiesinger replied thoughtfully. They carry their primitive nature with them, hidden beneath their technology. When threatened, they revert to what they truly are. In the Thoraxian hives, chitinous beings clustered around their own displays, their compound eyes processing the fight from multiple angles simultaneously. Pack tactics ineffective against solitary predator. Clicked prime soldier, translating the observations into the mathematical certainties that govern Thoraxian thought. Error in initial assessment. Humans not prey species despite appearance. Correction noted, replied another. Classification updated. Humans designated as apex predators disguised as social omnivores. Recommend avoidance protocol for future interactions. But it was in the human dormitories that the reaction was most interesting. Unlike the other species, who watched the footage with varying degrees of fear or fascination, the humans watched it with recognition. Jesus, Marcus, breathed Sarah Williams, a tactical sciences major from the North American Federation. Where did you learn to fight like that? Marcus sat on his bunk, a medical patch covering the cut on his forehead where Thactor's claws had caught him. His hands were steady as he cleaned his uniform, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the dormitory entrance. New Angeles, he said simply. You don't survive the gang territories without learning how to handle yourself. That wasn't just handling yourself, said Alex Petrov, a tall Russian whose family had military connections. That was systematic dismantling of superior opponents using nothing but knowledge and technique. My grandfather was Spetsnaz, and even he would have been impressed. Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. He'd never wanted to be special, had always preferred to blend into the background and avoid notice. The fight had been necessity, not choice, but he could already see how it was changing the way people looked at him. They didn't give me a choice, he said. Crothan culture respects strength. If I'd backed down, they would have seen it as permission to keep pushing. Sometimes you have to draw a line. A line. Sarah laughed, though there was no humor in it. Marcus, you didn't just draw a line. You drew it in blood and made sure everyone could see it. Before Marcus could respond, the dormitory door chimed and slid open to reveal Commander Vorthake. The massive Gorlin had to duck to fit through the entrance, his presence filling the room with an authority that made every cadet snap to attention. Cadet Chun, the commander said, his voice carrying the rumble of distant thunder. You will come with me. Marcus stood, his expression carefully neutral despite the adrenaline spike that accompanied any official summons. Yes, sir. As they walked through the academy's corridors, Marcus noticed the way other cadets reacted to his presence. Some stepped aside respectfully, others watched with curiosity or fear. Word of the fight had spread quickly, and, with it, a new understanding of what humans were capable of. Commander Vorthake led him to the Academy's administrative sector, where the walls were lined with portraits of distinguished graduates, and the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of interstellar bureaucracy. They stopped outside an office marked with the seal of Admiral Keth Moran, the Academy's commandant. Before we go in, the commander said quietly, you should know that there are those who want to see you expelled for this incident. The Crothan families have influence, and they're not pleased with the humiliation their sons have suffered. I understand, sir, Marcus replied, but I won't apologize for defending myself. The Gorlin's rocky features shifted in what might have been approval. Good. Never apologize for surviving, cadet. But be prepared to explain how you acquired the skills to do what you did. The office beyond was spacious but spartanly furnished, its design reflecting the no-nonsense efficiency valued by military minds throughout the galaxy. Admiral Keth Moran, a distinguished Zentari whose blue-scaled hide bore the ritual markings of a warrior scholar, sat behind a desk that seemed too small for his imposing presence. Beside him stood Captain Helena Morrison, one of only 3 human officers on the Academy's permanent staff. Her presence was both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because she understood human nature better than most, concerning because her expression suggested this meeting was more serious than a simple disciplinary hearing. Cadet Chun, Admiral Kethmoran said, his voice carrying the accent of the Zentari core worlds. Please sit. Marcus took the offered chair, noting the way both officers studied him. He'd been in enough trouble as a child to recognize the setup. They were evaluating him, looking for tells that would give them insight into his character and motivations. 7 Crothan cadets are currently in Medical Bay, the Admiral continued. All of them injured in an altercation with you. The surveillance footage shows you engaging multiple opponents with skills that far exceed anything taught in Academy curriculum. Where did you learn to fight like that? Earth, sir, Marcus replied honestly. Growing up in certain neighborhoods requires practical self-defense knowledge. Captain Morrison leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. I've reviewed your background file, Chun. New Angeles slums, single mother, scholarship student. But nothing in your records suggests formal combat training. What you did today wasn't street fighting. It was systematic dismantling of opponents using advanced knowledge of alien anatomy. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He'd hoped they wouldn't dig too deeply into the specifics of his abilities, but it seemed that hope had been naive. I study, sir, he said carefully. As a cadet, I have access to xenobiological databases. I thought it was important to understand the physiology of species I might encounter as a Federation officer. For medical purposes? Admiral Kethmoran asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. For practical purposes, sir, knowledge is survival on Earth. The more you understand about potential threats, the better your chances of handling them appropriately. The Admiral exchanged a glance with Captain Morrison, and Marcus could see some form of silent communication passing between them. When the Admiral spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. Cadet Chun, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Did you intend to seriously injure those Crothan cadets? Marcus met his gaze steadily. No, sir. If I had wanted to seriously injure them, they wouldn't be in Medical Bay. They'd be in morgue. The blunt honesty of the statement hung in the air like a challenge. Captain Morrison's expression shifted to something that might have been professional interest. Explain, she said simply. Crothan physiology includes redundant organ systems and distributed nervous networks that make them extremely resilient. Marcus said, falling back on clinical analysis to avoid the implications of what he was saying. Their primary vulnerabilities are their cervical nerve cluster, their secondary heart chamber, and the joint connections in their exoskeletal structure. I avoided all of those areas. Because you knew targeting them would be lethal, Admiral Kethmoran said. Because I knew it would be unnecessary, sir. My goal was to end the confrontation, not to kill anyone. And if that goal had required lethal force, the question hung between them like a trap. Marcus understood that his answer would determine not just his immediate future at the Academy, but possibly his entire career in the Federation fleet. But he also understood that lying would be worse than honesty. Then, I would have used lethal force, sir. Captain Morrison smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded Marcus that humans weren't the only predators in the galaxy. Good answer, Cadet. Now, let's talk about what happens next. What happened next would reshape not just Marcus's understanding of his place in the galaxy, but the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to have humans among them. Because Admiral Kethmoran and Captain Morrison had been waiting for someone exactly like Marcus Chun, someone who could prove that humanity's reputation for dangerous adaptability wasn't just propaganda. They were about to offer him an opportunity that would test every skill he'd learned on the streets of New Angeles and in the databases of the Academy. An opportunity that would take him from the classrooms and corridors he knew into the darker corners of galactic civilization, where his particular talents would be not just useful, but essential. But first, they had to make sure he understood what he was agreeing to. Because once he walked through the door they were offering to open, there would be no going back to being just another cadet trying to blend into the background. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you gave a human from the wrong side of Earth exactly the tools and training he needed to be effective. And Marcus Chun was about to discover that his fight with 7 Crothan cadets had been nothing more than an audition for something much more dangerous. Admiral Keth Moran activated a privacy field around his office, the subtle hum indicating that their conversation was now protected from any form of surveillance or recording. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he realized this meeting had moved far beyond a simple disciplinary hearing. What I'm about to tell you, Cadet Chun, is classified at the highest levels of Federation security, the Admiral began, his scaled features taking on an expression of absolute seriousness. The fact that you're hearing it at all indicates that certain people believe you might be useful for a particular type of work. Captain Morrison moved to a wall display, activating a holographic map that showed the known galaxy. Red markers indicated areas of conflict, while yellow zones showed regions of political instability. There were far more markers than Marcus would have expected from a supposedly peaceful Federation. The public face of the Federation is one of diplomatic cooperation and shared prosperity, Morrison said, her voice taking on the tone of a briefing officer. The reality is considerably more complex. We have ongoing conflicts with several non-member species, internal disputes between member worlds, and a growing problem with organized criminal syndicates that operate across multiple sectors. Sir, Marcus said carefully, I'm not sure why you're telling me this. I'm just an engineering cadet. Admiral Keth Moran's expression might have been amusement if Marcus had been better at reading Zentari facial expressions. Just an engineering cadet who neutralized 7 trained Crothan warriors using nothing but anatomical knowledge and advanced combat techniques. Techniques that, according to our analysis, represent a synthesis of multiple martial traditions that shouldn't exist in a single practitioner. Marcus felt the trap closing around him, but there was nowhere to run. I learned what I needed to survive, sir. Indeed. And now we're wondering if that survival instinct might serve the Federation's interests. Captain Morrison manipulated the display, zooming in on a sector marked with multiple red indicators. There are situations that require solutions outside the normal diplomatic or military channels. Problems that can't be solved by following standard protocols or respecting conventional limitations. You're talking about special operations, Marcus said, the pieces beginning to fall into place. We're talking about something that doesn't officially exist, Admiral Keth Moran corrected. A small unit of individuals with particular skills and flexible moral frameworks. Individuals who can operate in environments where normal Federation personnel would be ineffective or compromised. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They weren't offering him a chance to continue his academy education or pursue a normal career in the Federation fleet. They were offering him a chance to become something that existed in the shadows, handling problems that civilized society preferred not to acknowledge. Why me, he asked. There must be plenty of qualified personnel already in the fleet. Qualified, yes. But most Federation citizens come from worlds where violence is rare and combat skills are considered archaic. They can be trained to fight, but they can't be trained to think like a predator. Captain Morrison's expression was thoughtful. Humans are different. You evolve on a world that try to kill you every day, and you develop psychological adaptations that other species lack. What kind of adaptations? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The ability to compartmentalize morality when necessary. The capacity for controlled violence without losing operational effectiveness. The flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances without breaking down. Admiral Keth Moran enumerated the points with clinical precision. Most civilized species become non-functional when forced to operate outside their ethical comfort zones. Humans adaptado. Marcus thought about his childhood in New Angeles, about the choices he'd made to survive in an environment where showing weakness meant becoming victim. The Federation was right about human adaptability, but they didn't understand the cost. Every adaptation came with a price, and some prices couldn't be paid back. What would you want me to do? He asked. Captain Morrison changed the display again, showing a detailed tactical breakdown of a space station in what appeared to be neutral territory. Your first assignment would be infiltrating a criminal syndicate that's been trafficking sentient beings across 3 sectors. Standard Federation approaches have failed because the syndicate has contacts in local governments and military organizations. You want to go undercover. We want you to eliminate the threat, Admiral Keth Moran said bluntly. Infiltration would be the first step, but the ultimate goal would be complete disruption of their operations, whatever that requires. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus understood what they were really asking. Were he willing to kill in service of Federation interests? Was he capable of crossing lines that normal people couldn't cross? The honest answer was yes, and that realization troubled him more than he wanted to admit. "Sir," he said slowly, "I appreciate the confidence you're showing in my abilities, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this kind of work. I came to the Academy to build things, not destroy them." "Did you?" Captain Morrison asked. "Or did you come here because it was the only way off Earth that didn't involve joining one of the gangs you were trying to escape?" The question was like a knife between his ribs, precise and painful in its accuracy. Marcus had never articulated his motivations that clearly, but she was right. The Academy had been an escape route, not a calling. "That doesn't mean I want to become a killer," he said. "You already are a killer," Admiral Keth Moran said matter-of-factly. "The restraint you showed today was a choice, not a limitation. You could have killed those Crothan cadets easily, but you chose not to. That's exactly the kind of controlled lethality we need. What if I refuse? Then you complete your academy education, graduate with honors, and serve the Federation as an engineering officer on whatever vessel your scores qualify you for," Captain Morrison said. "No one will hold your refusal against you." And this conversation never happened. "But," Marcus asked, hearing the unspoken qualifier, "but you'll always know that you chose the safe path," Admiral Keth Moran said. "You'll spend your career maintaining fusion reactors and environmental systems while wondering what you might have accomplished if you'd been willing to use your full potential." The psychological manipulation was subtle, but effective. They'd identified his core weakness, the need to prove himself, to demonstrate that a kid from the New Angeles slums could be more than anyone expected. It was the same drive that had gotten him into the Academy, and they were using it to pull him into something much darker. "How many others are there?" Marcus asked. "In this unit that doesn't exist." "Currently, 12 active operatives," Captain Morrison replied. "All of them human, all recruited from similar circumstances. High adaptability, strong survival instincts, flexible moral frameworks. And how many of them are still alive?" The question seemed to surprise both officers, and Marcus realized he'd identified something they hadn't expected him to think about. Captain Morrison's expression became carefully neutral. "All 12 are currently operational," she said, "though the nature of their work means that status can change rapidly." In other words, Marcus thought people in this unit died regularly, but they were currently between casualties. It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement of the career path they were offering. "I need time to think about it," he said. "You have 24 hours, Admiral Keth Moran said. "After that, we'll need an answer. If you accept, you'll be transferred immediately to specialized training. If you decline, you'll return to your normal academy schedule, and we'll pretend this meeting never happened. And the incident with the Crothan cadets will be handled through normal disciplinary channels regardless of your decision," Captain Morrison assured him. "The families are demanding consequences, but the footage clearly shows you defending yourself against multiple attackers. You'll receive official censure for excessive force, but nothing that will affect your permanent record." Marcus stood, recognizing the dismissal in their tone. As he reached the door, Admiral Keth Moran spoke again. "One last thing, Cadet Shin. The work we're discussing isn't evil. The people and organizations we target are threats to innocent lives throughout the Federation. Sometimes the only way to protect civilization is to operate outside its rules." Marcus nodded, but didn't reply. As he walked back through the academy corridors, he found himself seeing everything differently. The alien cadets he passed weren't fellow students. They were potential targets or allies, their physiologies and psychological profiles automatically cataloged by a mind that was already adapting to see the galaxy through a predator's eyes. That night, he sat in his dormitory room and stared out at the stars visible through the reinforced transparent aluminum windows. Somewhere out there, sentient beings were suffering while criminals profited from their misery. The Federation's normal law enforcement agencies were failing to stop it, hampered by bureaucracy and legal limitations that gave criminals advantages over their victims. But Marcus could stop it. He had the skills, the mindset, and now the opportunity. All he had to do was accept that he would never be able to go back to being the person he'd been before. All he had to do was embrace what he'd always known he was, a weapon disguised as a person. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. He'd been running from what he was since the day he'd left Earth, trying to pretend that education and civilization could change his fundamental nature. But today's fight had proven that was a lie. When a moment came, he'd reverted to type without hesitation. Maybe it was time to stop running and start using what he was for something that mattered. The next morning, he knocked on Admiral Kethmoran's door exactly 24 hours after their first meeting. When he was invited in, he found the same setup. The Admiral, Captain Morrison, and the privacy field that meant this conversation would never be acknowledged. "I accept," he said without preamble. "Are you certain?" Captain Morrison asked. "Once you begin training, there's no going back to your previous life." "I'm certain." Admiral Kethmoran nodded, activating his personal communication device. "Send the transport," he said to whoever was on the other end. "We have a new recruit." As they waited for his transportation to arrive, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he wasn't trying to be something he wasn't. He was finally ready to become what Earth had made him, a survivor who would do whatever it took to protect the things he valued. The galaxy had no idea what it was about to unleash, but Marcus Chun was about to remind everyone why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in known space. And this time, he wouldn't be holding back. 6 months later, Marcus Chun stood on the observation deck of the Federation cruiser Harmony's Edge, watching as the criminal syndicate's space station erupted in silent explosions. The facility that had processed thousands of sentient beings through slavery networks across 3 sectors was now nothing more than expanding debris, its operations permanently terminated. The mission had taken 4 weeks of careful infiltration, another week of intelligence gathering, and exactly 17 minutes of systematic destruction. Marcus had walked into the station as a potential buyer looking to establish new trafficking routes. He'd walked out alone, leaving behind 43 dead criminals and enough evidence to implicate their political contacts in a dozen star systems. "Clean work," said Agent Sarah Voss, his handler for this mission. Like Marcus, she was human, though her background was corporate espionage rather than street survival. No witnesses, no survivors to seek revenge, and the evidence packages will reach Federation prosecutors within the hour. Marcus nodded, his attention still focused on the expanding debris field. Somewhere in that wreckage were the remains of beings who had profited from others' suffering for years. He felt no satisfaction in their deaths, but no guilt either. They made their choices, and those choices had consequences. "Regrets?" Agent Voss asked, studying his profile. "About the mission?" "No, about the path that led me here." Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but not today." The specialized training had been unlike anything taught at the academy. Where the academy focused on building leaders who could inspire cooperation and coordinate complex operations, Marcus's new education had been about becoming something much simpler and infinitely more dangerous, a solution to problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means. He learned to forge identities that would pass the most sophisticated background checks. He'd studied criminal psychology and organizational behavior until he could predict how illegal syndicates would respond to various pressures. He'd mastered weapons systems that officially didn't exist and interrogation techniques that the Federation publicly condemned. Most importantly, he'd learned to compartmentalize. The person who had methodically eliminated every criminal on that station wasn't the same person who stood here analyzing the mission's success. They shared the same body and memories, but they operated according to different moral frameworks, different definitions of acceptable behavior. It was a psychological adaptation that most species couldn't achieve without severe mental damage. Humans, products of a world where moral flexibility often meant the difference between life and death, could make the transition with surprising ease. It was another reminder of why the Federation's shadow operations were staffed almost exclusively by his species. Your next assignment briefing is in 1 hour, Agent Voss said, handing him a secure datapad. Priority Alpha classification, which means you won't have backup and extraction protocols are limited. Marcus accepted the datapad, but didn't activate it immediately. He'd learned that taking time to process one mission before beginning the next was essential for maintaining operational effectiveness. Rushing from job to job was how operatives made mistakes, and mistakes in his line of work were usually fatal. What's the basic scope, he asked. Pirate Confederation that's been raiding Federation shipping in the Outer Rim. They've taken hostages from civilian transports and are demanding territorial concessions from local governments. Diplomatic solutions have failed. Military intervention would result in hostage casualties. Marcus understood the implications. Another problem that required a scalpel rather than a hammer. Another situation where conventional morality was a luxury they couldn't afford. Time frame, 6 weeks maximum. After that, the hostages start dying and the political situation becomes untenable. Marcus activated the datapad and began reading the preliminary intelligence summary. The Pirate Confederation was larger and better organized than most, with nearly 2,000 members operating out of modified asteroid bases in 3 different systems. Their leader was a former Federation naval officer who'd been discharged for war crimes during the hegemony conflicts. It would be challenging work, requiring deep infiltration of a paranoid organization led by someone who understood Federation operational protocols. But Marcus found himself looking forward to it. After months of relatively simple termination missions, he was ready for something that would test his full range of abilities. I'll need additional equipment for this one, he said, noting several items in the intelligence summary that would require specialized countermeasures. Already arranged. Your gear will be delivered to your quarters tonight, along with detailed psychological profiles of the primary targets. As Agent Voss left, Marcus remained at the observation deck, watching the last debris from the destroyed station drift past the ship's hull. Each piece of wreckage represented someone who had believed they were untouchable, protected by distance and political connections from any consequences for their actions. They'd been wrong, and their error had cost them everything. Marcus's comm unit chimed with an incoming message from an unexpected source, the Academy. Specifically from Thactor, the Crothan cadet who had led the attack that had started Marcus down this path. The message was brief and formal. Cadet Shun, I have learned of your departure from the Academy. My pack brothers and I wish to express our respect for your warrior spirit. We were wrong to test you, and we have learned much from our mistake. May your enemies fear you, as we have learned to respect you. Honor to your hunt. Marcus stared at the message for several minutes, remembering the young alien who had demanded he kneel in a corridor that now seemed like something from another life. Thactor had been arrogant and foolish, but he'd also been operating according to the cultural values of his species. In Crothan society, strength determined status, and Marcus had proven his strength in the most direct way possible. He composed a brief reply. Honor to your pack, Thactor. May your own hunts be successful. It was a small gesture, but Marcus had learned that maintaining connections to his previous life helped prevent the complete dissolution of his original identity. The person he'd been at the Academy was still part of him, even if that person couldn't function in his current environment. His quarters aboard the Harmony's Edge were spartanly furnished, but comfortable, designed for extended missions where operatives might be aboard for months at a time. Marcus had personalized the space minimally. A few books on human history, a photograph of New Angeles taken from orbit, and a small wooden sculpture his mother had given him before he left Earth. The sculpture was of a guardian spirit from Chinese mythology, carved by his grandfather before the family had emigrated to North America. His mother had told him it would protect him from the dark spirits that sought to corrupt good people. At the time, he considered it a quaint superstition. Now, he wondered if the dark spirits had already won. The specialized equipment for his next mission arrived as promised. Modified personal armor that could pass for civilian clothing, weapons designed to avoid most standard detection systems, and chemical compounds that could incapacitate or eliminate targets, depending on dosage. Everything he needed to walk into a heavily defended pirate stronghold and systematically destroy it from within. As he checked each piece of equipment, Marcus reflected on the path that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he'd been a nobody cadet trying to avoid notice and complete his education. Now, he was a ghost who moved through the galaxy's shadows, eliminating problems that threatened Federation stability. The transformation had been surprisingly easy, which troubled him more than he liked to admit. It suggested that his capacity for this work had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. The Academy had merely provided the trigger, and the Federation had provided the training and opportunity. But effectiveness didn't equal satisfaction, and Marcus found himself wondering what he would become after years of this work. The other operatives he'd met seemed functional, but hollow, their personalities worn down by the necessity of constant moral flexibility. Would he eventually become like them, a tool that served its purpose, but had lost any connection to its original humanity? The question would have to wait. Tomorrow, he would begin preparation for infiltrating the Pirate Confederation, and he would need to become someone else entirely. Someone with a criminal background that would pass scrutiny, someone with skills that would be valued by pirates, someone whose morality was flexible enough to earn their trust. The Federation needed him to be that person, and Marcus had committed himself to serving Federation interests regardless of personal cost. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered if his mother's guardian spirit was still watching, and if it approved of what he had become. Outside his quarters viewport, the stars shone with cold indifference. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but it was also full of predators who saw others as nothing more than resources to be exploited. The Federation stood as a beacon of civilization in that darkness, but civilization required defenders who were willing to operate outside its rules. Marcus Chun had become one of those defenders, and the galaxy was safer for it. But as he settled into meditation before beginning his mission preparation, he couldn't shake the feeling that each mission took him further from the person he'd once been, and closer to becoming something that even he didn't fully understand. Perhaps that was the price of protecting civilization. Someone had to be willing to become something uncivilized in its defense. Perhaps the dark spirits his grandfather had warned about weren't external threats, but the choices that shaped people into weapons. As he drifted toward sleep, Marcus made himself a promise. No matter how many missions he completed, no matter how deep into darkness his work took him, he would hold on to some core of who he'd been before this all started. He would remain Marcus Chun, the kid from New Angeles who had dreamed of building things instead of destroying them. Even if that person only existed in moments like this, when a mission was over and the next one hadn't yet begun. Even if maintaining that identity became harder with each passing assignment. Because if he lost that connection completely, the Federation might gain a perfect weapon, but the galaxy would lose something infinitely more valuable. Proof that even humans, for all their adaptability and capacity for violence, could still choose to remain human at their core. Tomorrow, he would become someone else. Tonight, he was still Marcus Chun, and that was enough. The stars continued their ancient dance outside his viewport, indifferent to the struggles of the small beings who lived and died beneath their light. But somewhere among those stars, people slept safely because others were willing to venture into the darkness on their behalf. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was the best the galaxy had managed to create. And Marcus Chun, former Academy cadet turned shadow operative, had found his place within it. Whether that place would ultimately save him or damn him remained to be seen. But for now, it was enough that he was exactly where the galaxy needed him to be.